day of December 2024. Hello everybody, welcome back. I do a little bit of bouncing around. A little bit of bouncing around. Hope everybody's doing good. We're going to pick up. We got the Geiger counter up in the corner again. That was a nightmare today. Just trying to get that to work. That's the way she rolls. It seems everything we do is a nightmare. But we eventually get her done. Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nations in Ignis to lead the long-term nuclear waste management project. The natives didn't agree to this. And that's a problem. The natives they're not going to be lying down taking this 264 counts per minute, 273 counts per minute. I should turn that back off. Nightmares. Fails to mention the momentous concerns held by the many opponents of the nuclear waste management project. Fails too. No, they got $26 billion. They don't miss anything. They simply, that is never in the plan, is to have dissenting voices because they might have to listen to it. Once they listen to it, they can't get it out of their head. It's just bad for scumbags, right? In fact, during the 14 years of community consultations, which you mentioned, many of the other, this was a letter written into that paper. It's a good letter. They've done great. Many of the other communities, nuclear waste management organizations, studies decided after due consideration they were not willing to proceed. So there was a whole bunch of other communities that said no. The nuclear waste management organization will try to paint it as, oh, well, it wasn't a really good geographical area for a deep geological repository. That's simply not true. It's the Canadian Shield, so it's all the same, right? Since they were not convinced of its safety, which is 100% right, and appropriately so. You're going to dig a big hole in the ground in prime farmland country with thousands of freshwater lakes around you. You're going to put all your nuclear waste in the same basket and wait for it to melt down because it's going to melt down. Once you leave it alone, this stuff is dangerous for hundreds of thousands of years because it's splitting atoms, and the atoms create heat. The atoms boil water also for 1 million homes and businesses every day for every reactor core they stuff down there. That's still splitting atoms. If you breathe them in, you get sick and die. And there's no containment for 80 years. It's all been hemorrhaging into the environment. Also of concern to many is the lack of democratic process seen to date. The non-nuclear waste management organization has got $26 billion for 22 years and hasn't grown a cent of interest, which is really suspect. You're talking about the government. Has stated unequivocally that they would only proceed with an informed and willing host. And we've never heard those connotations for any other nuclear dump, right? They fly by night and dump it in your backyard, in your estuaries, and your landfills. And 50 years later, you find out why all your loved ones died from cancers and heart problems and liver problems. Once you abandon it, it melts down. That could be... It doesn't even need to wait that long. You can put it in there like you've seen the nuclear... WIP, the Waste Isolation Pilot Project, which is supposed to be an experimental one. So it melted down in 2014. We covered it, right? The media down there actually put me on television, called me a conspiracy theorist. And I was only used in their documentation and their videos. They spent $6 billion on a salt truck fire. Not a meltdown, Dana. Oh, that makes sense. And they dug a whole new deep geological repository. And a foreign and willing host, which would have to make a compelling demonstration of willingness. So like in the 80, 85, 90% range of the consensus, right, of the population. It was 51 It was 51 to 49% was the vote. Like, too late, you can't vote either, you can't read it, you can't come and investigate it, you can't look at any of the evidence. It's a done deal. Have a nice day, scumbags. Why did he wait 22 years? Because they can't contain it, see? Why are they going to wait another 30 years, 40 years before they can start putting waste underground? Because they can't contain it. They want to use that narrative. Oh, well, we got a deep geological repository in Canada, and so we can make all the nuclear we want. We got a spot to put it. That's the solution, right? They're not physically going to be doing it. None of us alive today is going to see a gram of waste go down on the ground. That's a fact. You can't, because if you leave it alone, it'll melt down. You lose the whole site like they done. That happened at WIP. Except WIP was a different material. We're talking about actual fuel assemblies. The top of the nightmare when it comes to nuclear. You know, the emissions from this stuff is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. And the emissions are like an invisible snowstorm. Every nuclear plant is doing it, and the trucks are vented on the highway. You can't contain this stuff because they're going to repackage it at the site. So if they're going to repackage it at the site, it's because it's not contained. In order to contain it, you got to seal it up in a 50,000 pound container, and you have to, when the oxygen is replaced by helium, and then you can seal it. But it still has to have fans on it for quite a few decades to cool down the container. But then it's so-called not venting into the environment, not splitting atoms into the environment no more. And you can't open the container, because when you let oxygen rush back in there, that'll detonate. It doesn't need a spark. All it needs is the oxygen to go in there, and that'll cause a detonation. This is why they call it very volatile, too. And when you seal it in the ground, guess what happens? You know, there's a story about 25 years ago. They said they were running out of helium. No, the nuclear industry needed it all. Everything. No kids were allowed to have a birthday party with helium balloons is what they were trying to do. They didn't get away with it, but all the media was out there pumping that narrative. Everybody was having the same conversation worldwide. The same pictures, the same paragraphs, by the same author. There's 1,800 medias, and they all got the same picture, the same paragraphs, and the same author, and everybody's face worldwide in less than 3 minutes. It's all done digitally. So everything's vented on the highway. Concerns include security prior to and during burial. Well, security, no one's going to steal nuclear waste because it melts your organs. So you can't, like, pick it up and move it physically. And because these are occupied sites, and there's nobody wants this kind of waste. The only chairs out there that would utilize this kind of waste is called government. Leakage into a groundwater system, they've been doing it to you for 80 years. Time to smarten up. Leakage into groundwater systems after burial, it's forever. It's perpetual. It burns at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures eventually. It doesn't need oxygen to burn forever. Deep under the ground, at the bottom of the ocean, doesn't matter. It'll burn forever. They don't got a solution. I don't got a solution. And I'm at this forever. I don't even know what you would do with it. Like, you know, the theory of shooting it into the sun. It's a pretty good theory. But we shouldn't introduce this stuff into space because this is anthropogenic man-made stuff. This is not the elements from the stars. So we have to put that in consideration because we don't know what... And space is so big and vast. Don't be so silly, Dan. I hear you. But how do you get it into space without it having an accidental misfire, rocket blowing up in the atmosphere, right? Because there's a ratio. 1 in 100 rockets will blow up. And so if you ship 100 rockets to the sun, at least one's going to blow up in the atmosphere. But not that it matters anymore because we had Fukushima, right? And we got 1,000 fuel pools splitting atoms into the biosphere all day, every day, every second of every day. This is absurd. Each fuel rod, so there's 100 fuel rods in an assembly. 1,800 pounds. It's 12 feet long, and each rod is 18 pounds. Assembly got 100 of them, say. So if you take one of those rods and you chop it into 30 pieces. Now we're just going to talk about the gamma shines, neutron bombardments, the beta rays, the X-rays that are perpetual forever from these things. So if you're in proximity, for instance, not the actual splitting atoms, we'll talk about that in a second. If you took each piece, 30 pieces, and brought them to the subways in each country, one for each subway, on the steers, everybody had to walk past it. And the same thing for the big major airports. And you've done 30 like that. You would wipe out a large percentage of the population in about 6 months. Because a large percent of the population is using those venues, right? So let's say 35% of the population in 6 months would be dead. Everybody who walks past it each day dies for 1,000,000 years, so how bad is that? But it has another insidious one, nightmare disaster effect, is that the fuel rods has gone through a chain reaction. They bombarded with neutrons, and so they're splitting atoms. That's what makes them hot. The atoms are released. They never stay there. They're vented, and they're released in a form of water vapor. So each fuel pool in a typical reactor has 2 fuel pools, and that's where they store the decades of reactor cores, because you don't have a repository anywhere on the planet. And so the fuel is splitting atoms. And it would look like, and I mean this sincerely when I show it to you, I'm going to show you a study of the French's radioactive fallout from Fukushima based on a few weeks. Every fuel pool, because the model is based on venting. So let's just watch that for 1 second. This model is based on venting. And this model particularly is based, when it stops, is based at 30 days. And so we're approaching 20 days of radioactive fallout. So it never stops coming out of the source. That's 20 days right there. The model stops at 31 days, or 30 days. And so every fuel pool is making a plume like that. So gas, oil, and coal, or factory pollution, is huge pollution. It doesn't travel very far. Gas, oil, and coal is carbon. It doesn't travel very far. It's carbon. It's not so tiny that it's going to rise up into the atmosphere. It's way heavy. It's going to sink and immediately be assimilated into the food chain, because that's what everything is made of. It's carbon. Carbon's good. No carbon, we look like the moon. But that was the cover story for some reason they picked. Well, there's some fairly obvious reasons why they used that, but so the radioactive fall, the only thing that makes plumes that covers the entire planet, and this model is, say, 30 days. This is the French government. All the models from different countries agree with this model. But every fuel pool, and the model is based on venting. It's not based on the nuclear meltdowns. And we can't let this industry and their public relation firms, in particular, is the reason we're in so much trouble, because they're hiding it successfully from you. So, for instance, this is not venting. This is complete annihilation. At the top of each building was around 6 million pounds, which this is pure uranium, pure plutonium, and reactor 3 was so-called Medusa. If you look at it, you die. It's a Medusa. It's a real-life Medusa. Because of the gamma shines, the X-rays, the neutron bombardment, the beta rays, the alpha shine from the actual inventories, which are decades of reactor cores. They have to be underwater, because otherwise they'll kill everybody within 1,000 feet just from the pulses of energy. Not just radioactive fallout, but the actual physics, because you're in proximity, right? But to the day, they won't. The International Atomic Energy Agency included will not acknowledge that this melted down. Will not acknowledge that that is destroyed. And this building was 150 feet taller than what it's supposed to be. And the fuel pools, reactor cores were at the top of the buildings. The same with reactor 3. And reactor 2 and reactor 1, which are 4 buildings that melted down. And they refused to acknowledge reactor 4. They only acknowledged 1, 2, and 3, but they barely acknowledged that. And the assertion is of last year, a huge public relation campaign all year long about tritium and Fukushima dumping it into the ocean. Forget about this. Forget about the fact that 55 countries banned the food in 14 prefectures for a decade. Let's sweep that under the rug and get everybody to concentrate on tritium and the ocean. Tritiated water and the ocean. Let's forget about nuclear. Let's just talk about water. And the water, put it in the context of tritium. Not tritium-3H, which is what it is, a man-made anthropogenic tritium. It's just tritium. There's a tritium that comes from space and interacts with elements in the upper atmosphere and creates what's known as tritium. Tritium shows up in the form of rainfall. It's water, basically, radioactive water. So 14 prefectures were banned by 55 countries for a decade. And the food was banned. But they got rid of that. And so everybody's like, we're going to dump the water in the ocean, Dana. Yeah, but the food's been banned by China for the whole time, too. Don't care about that. Let's talk about the ocean. And this is how they manage this odious, repugnant, sickening, right? It's despicable. It's reprehensible. It's yucky, anyway. You can't eat the food, and you won't be able to eat the food on the highways, both sides of the highways, because the trucks heading up to the Nuclear Waste Management Organization's dump, the big hole in the ground where they're going to dump all the nuclear waste and wait for it to melt down, is going to be contaminated because everything is vented on the highways. What they got from the Wabigu, and I'm going to butcher names, and I apologize for that, Lake Ojibwe Nation, because I talk about all different countries, different languages, and I just lump it all together. I don't know none of it. According to the November 18th statement, it was an agreement to proceed at a site characterization process for Nuclear Waste Management Organization project, and that the yes vote does not signify approval of the project. Right? And our guest we had on last week articulated that. The Nuclear Waste Management Organization sought consent from the two communities. Ignis, which is actually upstream from the Revel site, and the Ojibwe Nation, which is in the watershed of the chosen location. The yes vote does not signify approval of the project. They've been doing it for a decade. Say you can look in our territory. And there was kickbacks into the community. And then they were just like, well, it's time. They said a few months ago they were going to pull the plug on it before the end of 2024. And they got sick of it. And they want their Christmas bonuses early. And the 8 million species be damned. And let's not forget, the radioactive fallout comes right across the ocean, it goes right across Canada, the United States. In Alaska and British Columbia coastline, 8 billion crabs went missing. 10 billion snow crabs went missing. That's the end of the snow crab fishery. You ever see it on TV, the Discovery Channel, the snow crab, big draggers far offshore? That ended with a bang, or a whimper, whichever way, which depends on where you live, which is equal to 4 times more crab than they harvested in the entire legacy of the crab fishery. Disappeared. And so that's the end of that. That's because a lot of radiation sinks to the ocean floor, of course, and bioaccumulates. And so the crabs live on the ocean floor. And they're also they filter water too, right? And it destroys the integrity of their shells on top of that. And so in Canada, the trucks that are bringing it there are all vented. And if you can see radiation, this is what it would look like all day on the highways. And this stuff never goes away. Bioaccumulates. The same as the fuel pools. Splitting atoms all day long, bioaccumulating everything worldwide. And now Fukushima was a pulse event. We had multiple reactors, never seen before, never even conceived before, melting down in less than 1 week. And at the top of the buildings were decades of reactor cores. They're just as volatile as a running reactor core in the air for thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. You took them out of the reactor because they were what's known as embrittled. This means you got billions of extra microscopic cracks in the zirconium cladding so the radiation can escape. So when you take it out and put it in a pool, it's a death sentence for everything within 100 miles of heart problems. Not just cancers, heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline. Have you seen an increase in Alzheimer's, dementia? Huh? Have you? Really? So the first studies they do is autism and Down syndrome. Not just for humans either, it's for the animal kingdom too, for the farms and that. The Nuclear Waste Management Organization states that the process was a consent-based sitting process led by Canadians and Indigenous people. We came out and argued that originally, right, when they made the announcement on that following Sunday. They done it on a Friday because my show's in on Thursdays and they start up on Sunday. Because we're doing the best. I'm doing the best I can. 5 days a week. If I can do it, I'll do it. If I don't do a show, it's pretty rough. Things are not very good when I don't do a show. And whether I want to do a show or not, I'm doing a show. It's just so important. We have to do a show as often as possible. And a number of years ago, I decided instead of doing it 7 days a week, I'll give people a break and only do it 5 days a week. And that was a mistake. We lost quite a lot of momentum. And the industry is really good at taking away your momentum, right? At blocking you and isolating you, shadow banning you. So there was no consent-based sitting process. The consent was to stay on board as a possible host community. No, come on, let's get it on with. None of that was ever there. In fact, the native communities gave a cautious endorsement to proceed to the next step, not to an actual agreement, of an approximate 10-year period of impact assessment and regulatory processes. And resistance to the project is strong and will be ongoing. Grassy Knolls First Nations, also in northwestern Ontario, is upset with the decision. And Grassy Knolls is grappling with generations of mercury poison from the Dryden west of their native community and lands. After a mill in Dryden pumped 9,000 kilograms of mercury into the English Wabigoon river systems in the 1960s. That'll be poison for, and mercury is just insidious. And they love killing the native drinking water, right? Like a lot of the tailing ponds are situated, if you break, they end up in the drinking waters, which means they're all going to leak anyway. They're all evaporated. There's no cover on any of these. And so the Navajo, which is not their real name, by the way, it's the North American name given to them, but the Navajo natives had one of the biggest waste dams break open and end up in their community. And it devastated. Even today, it's just devastating to everybody and every animal in that area. It's really, it was engineered to happen that way. It was meant on purpose. And so building this in one of the most pristine areas imaginable, you should see it. I was there a few years ago. I stayed in Ignis. There's a little park when you drive into town from the west, when you're heading east. And as soon as you start to come into this little town, there's a park where you go in and set up your campsite or trailers, or they also have buildings rented you can rent out to stay into for a couple of nights. And that's what I had done. I stayed there for a few nights. I had problems with the trailer. I was bringing the boat. I had the big Zodiac, the 25-foot Zodiac in tow. And I ended up staying there for a couple of days. Super, unbelievable nice people. Exceptionally nice people that were running, that owned that. They were just amazing souls. And so the Nuclear Waste Management Organization between there and Revel, is it a Revel stroke or something? Within a few mile, I think it's within 20 miles or something like that. Don't quote me exactly. Of Ignis is where they're going to put the Ledge Nuclear Waste Management Project. They're looking at 10, 20 years for regulatory processes, which is, bloody well the nuclear industry is never going to say no. Right? They've been hemming and hawing for 22 years already with $26 billion, never grew a cent of interest. And so they're going to stall another 20 years before they even say, okay, well, let's get started. And then they're going to spend, they're going to have a 1 square mile site at the surface. And also then they got to dig a big tunnel and a bunch of shafts. Nobody's ever done it before. It'll take them forever to do it. No, but it will take them forever to do it. They're looking at 43, 44 years with some of their quotes down the road. If everything goes perfect, there's 43 to 40 years before you start putting nuclear waste down in the ground. What they're up to is avoiding putting nuclear waste in the ground. They wasted 22 years sitting on $26 billion. When you got $26 billion and you're not motivated, there's two things going on. It's either you're the stupidest person conceivable, or that there was no intention to ever put it in the ground in the near future. They wanted it because everything is vented. 5.5 million current bundles of nuclear fuel assemblies, splitting atoms into the environment with no containment. Most of us sitting in fuel pools. And the fuel pools are boiling up about 120,000 liters each a day. If you got two in the building, almost 250,000 liters a day. Each liter is insidious amount of curium isotopes, uranium isotopes, plutonium. Like, we're talking insidious numbers. That's vented worldwide. This is why we can trace the decline of all the species to the beginning of the nuclear industry, to the inception, to the Manhattan Project era in particular. The nuclear testing, we've covered how many stories of studies where fish populations, like the Marshall Islands, is still 1 million square kilometers is too radioactive to be habitable. 1 million square kilometers all these years later. Maralinga and Montebello in Australia, devastated. Tropical paradises, all of these are tropical paradises. They went out and destroyed all of them. The French and the French Polynesian Islands, tropical paradise. The British down to the Christmas Islands, tropical paradise out in the middle of the oceans. These extraordinary, wonderful nurseries on top of that for all the species. Just real paradises out in the middle of the ocean, thousands of miles away from any land. They went out and destroyed it. And these were tropical paradises. These are what you see all the cartoons and all the Hollywood fantasy movies and all this with these tropical paradises. And they still exist, but they're nuclear wastelands. They don't look any different. You can't see it or smell it or taste it. And so typically almost every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms. The same thing with dumps. And so whatever you put down in that ground is going to melt down at some point. It could melt down in 5 years after they start. It could melt down the same year like we've seen at the Waste Isolation Pilot Project. You're talking about fuel rods, actual fuel rods. These are Medusas. If you got fuel rod at it first, well, because it's zirconium cladding is going to catch fire and burn. But once it melts down, you got a big blob there, for instance, like they claim at Chernobyl. If you can physically see it with your eyes, you died a few seconds later. Just from the shine and the neutron bombardment, the beta rays, the X-rays, the gamma shines. And so the native community, I got a lot of hope for. Can this knowledge reach them? Can this extra information that will empower them reach them, right? Because this will empower those communities. The stuff we talk about, and unfortunately, I don't know where else to direct them to find even a fraction of the information we bring to the table constantly, right? Does anybody know? We've never found anybody out there that's doing an educational program and shown the documentation, right? There's never been anybody on the planet has ever done that. And so I draw a lot of attacks from the industry. They're quite cowardly people. The transported extremely dangerous nuclear waste is disposal within our watershed will do irreparable destruction to the land, rivers, and their way of life. Yeah, just on the highway, everything is vented. Everything is splitting atoms. And then everybody's on the highway, and the houses on the highway along the way. Everybody's passing on the highway in other vehicles, driving the opposite direction at 60 miles per hour. They're still getting multiple X-rays of radiation when you pass those vehicles. The front of the vehicle, the trailers are lead shielding, right? Even down the sides, they're all lead shielding. You don't want the truck drivers dropping dead because that looks bad. But we know from experience that you're getting several X-rays. Like if you got a little piece the size of the top of my finger on the side of the road, and there's an example of that earlier this year in Australia. And there's this long stretch, it's like 1,200 miles maybe. And there's not much there. And these construction crew that has this special equipment had a chunk of cesium about this big that got out of his container and was lost on the highway. And they estimated everybody drove past that little tiny chunk, not transport truckloads, but that little tiny chunk on the side of the highway. When you drove past it with your family, you all got multiple X-rays. If your wife was pregnant, 2 X-rays on a pregnant person, it's a 50% chance that child will never graduate school and will have incredible difficulties in their childhood too. So imagine a truck with thousands of pounds on board of it, not a gram, but thousands of pounds on the same highway. And unless the truck is 6 feet thick lead, you're getting brutal doses on both sides of the roads. That kind of irradiation will stick. And then you're releasing radiation the entire time. The trucks, everything is vented, right? Oh yeah, hang on here now. Some days they're diamonds, some days they're... Yeah, I got to do some fancy stuff now because I've got the Geiger counter up. In order for me to leave it up there, it's a little trickier to bring this stuff back in, but I got to figure it out, I think. I'm Dana, by the way. You can call in at 709-589-4406. 709-589-4406. We're in Canada. Now, I like to do that because the people that are my detractors can never say that we didn't give them an opportunity to have their say or the debate. Welcome to debate. It has to be a debate, though, not a one-sided name-calling like they do to me all the time. But a debate, right? You're welcome to call in if you want to have a debate. And I'll bring you to my documentation. You can tell me yours. I don't even need to see it. I'll take your word. But if my documentation supersedes yours, then you have to reconsider. The settlement is shared by the Grand Council Treaty Number 3 and the Chiefs and Council Resolution dated October the 3rd, 2024, makes clear that a deep geological repository for the storage of nuclear waste will not be developed at any point in the Treaty Number 3 territory, so fuck right off. Off your with a big stick. Way to go, man. That's probably one of the best statements I've ever heard. Let me be very succinct. A deep geological repository for the storage of nuclear waste will not be developed at any point in the native communities' territory. Have a nice day. And that's exactly where they're planning on putting it. And thank goodness, and let's hope they stick to that resolve. I'm pretty sure they will by the sounds of it. Because eventually that's what happens to the site. At some point, There might not be no humans left on the planet, but at some point, we might all be here. It might be 5 years after they start, or 1 year, or 10 years, or 30 years, but it's going to happen. And if it comes in contact with water, it's going to split the earth open, and then that's going to happen. And this is going to go on for millions of years. The nuclear shouldn't exist on the planet. And we need to take 2,000, 3,000 universities and get them to figure out how we're going to deal with this properly. Not this song and dance from chicken necks, the inbreeds of the inbreeds of the industry. Because that's what we're currently dealing with. And we are running out of time. We don't have any time to waste. We really don't. I'm not here doing this. Like, I have ran myself into the ground, right into the ground since Fukushima, trying to educate the population. I've been successfully silenced, but we also only need to tell the truth, and the truth defeats their lies every second of every day, right? Let me keep rolling. I'm still not through the story, but that's some statement. I love that statement so much. In fact, let me take that statement and put it in my collection of ha 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 that I get to use against the nuclear industry. So the highways are going to be brutalized if you put that waste in your native communities, right? So it's very, very important that we see sediments like this, where no way, hombre, is... Because the industry can't take no. It doesn't know what to do. When you say no to the industry, it literally has a seizure. They fall on their back and start crying and sniveling and whining. Ah, it never went my way. This means that we will continue to have a nuclear waste being stored all around the Great Lakes. And I got a picture of that for you. Right there. Let me put this on the big shiny screen, the big shiny one. And that's a problem. So the Great Lakes are full of nuclear dumps and nuclear power plants and nuclear fuel production sites, which are one of the most polluting sites conceivable, by the way. I'm just trying to get my other window back. All right. While I'm at it, let's bring Dana back. So the Great Lakes are saturated. This is the third biggest aquifer of fresh water on the bloody planet. And they're purposely trying to kill water on this planet with the nuclear industry. When you look at it symmetrically like we do for so long, and so consistent, that's the only conclusion you're left with. The buildings don't exist, but they're saying that they're on top of the building, looking down on the fuel pool, 150 feet above that stump there. Nobody, like you can't go near that stump, let alone go on top of that stump. Everything you see in there is remote controlled, is lifted in and laid there with a crane, a remote controlled crane. These are nuclear meltdowns. These are not coal plants or oil plants or gas plants. These are your organs melt, you sit down and you excrete your intestines and you stay in that position because you're dead. They melted. The plumes covered the planet, certainly Canada, United States. When it says square meter, that means your garden too, okay? When it says square meters, it means where your kid stands up and waits for the bus or hangs out on the playground or plays sports. It means that walk to the shop and back is that same ground, that same square meter, every square meter. They're not talking about a square meter, they're talking about all the square meters of North America. All of it. And that study there is the xenon-133. There was 10 million atoms of cesium-137, which pulses energy 600 feet, invisible snowstorm. The French government. There was 20 million particles, actual particles, even worse than the physical atoms. These are just horrific stuff. Per liter rainfall sustained. And we know there's at least 31 times more iodine-129, and a separate study out of Ottawa, Canada, by the way, shows 220 million atoms per liter. These are numbers we've never conceived, and this will slowly but surely kill the bacteria, the fungus, and certainly all species dependent upon them. And we're seeing that play out now. All right, let me get back down here. I got 3 more sentences to try to get through. Such an important story, you don't want to rush it. This means that we will continue to have the nuclear waste being stored all around the Great Lakes. All of it's vented into the environment, splitting atoms on top of that. This is the problem. And this is what they want. They don't want to put this in the ground. You're 43 years, but done 43, 46 years before they actually put anything underground. If everything goes on schedule. Nothing ever in the history of nuclear went on schedule. Nothing. There was nothing out there. The second last nuclear plant they built in the United States took 44 years, was Watts Bar 2, right? This means that we will continue to have nuclear waste being stored all around the Great Lakes. So rather than containing as close to source as possible, which is the highly populated areas, Pickering and Darlington in Canada. We're talking about Canada and Pacific here. But this is applicable to every country that has the disease factories known as nuclear power plants. As is intentionally recommended by the proximity principle, it is now going to be spread around the highways of 3 provinces, as well as being kept at this. And not only on the highway, you're talking about coming from New Brunswick all the way, through Quebec, all the way into Ontario, and halfway almost through Ontario, close to Manitoba, so to speak, right? Compared to Quebec. So all the highways are going to be everybody on it, and some of these highways are very, very. What's going to be like during the holiday seasons? Because people up there love to go north, right? And so the trucks on the highways are going to be just radiating the daylights out of everybody. It is now going to be spread on the highways as well as being kept at the site of production as it waits to become stable enough to transport, which is typically around 50 years. It's splitting atoms into the environment. It's only staying in a reactor. The first time they crack the reactor open after putting fuel in, there's about 14 months. They take out maybe a quarter or a third of it. They put that into a deep, special type of water full of boron, stop it from a random chain reaction criticality event. But the stuff is very fragile, right? It's gone through a chain reaction. It's only 3% of the energy was used into it. And so it's still 97% dangerous. If you took a Dixie cup, like a 1/3 of a cup of this stuff, and put it in a restaurant in the wall, McDonald's, where there's 200 people every hour, every one of them will die each day, every 20 minutes. Take all the dead bodies out and do it again. That's how dangerous this stuff is, but it's splitting atoms. Those atoms can't be contained. They're released perpetually into the environment, particularly under transportation. So it shouldn't exist anyway. No matter where it's to, it's a nightmare for everybody else on the planet, for every species, everything with replicating cells. It's a nightmare. And the health issues are endless. It's not just heart problems. It's not just cancer. There's many, many cancers. The amount of cancers we're talking about, there's 865,000 extra cancers in the first year after Fukushima just in Japan. Not everybody got health care. Not everybody was diagnosed. It's not just cancers, heart, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitaries, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia. You've seen all that just explode, right? Anytime you go get your hair cut, ask the hairdressers. You're hearing a lot of stories about Alzheimer's, and they're like, "Oh, it's crazy." Everybody used to come here, got Alzheimer's, even the 50-year-olds. People dropping dead walking down the road in their 40s. That's normal now. And weird random cancers. When I was young, there was a kid on the West Coast up in Birch who got cancer. A kid. And the whole coast had a fundraiser. Because I've never seen a kid with cancer before. This was during the 60s. Just leading up to the 70s. It was open. They were blowing up nuclear weapons all around the world and calling it testing. So instead of he launched a nuclear weapon, this guy launched a nuclear weapon, just launched their own nuclear weapons and dropped back down on themselves. Oh, it's testing, yeah, but it's the same radioactive fallout. It's the same weapon. Calling it testing was just another way of making you look away, right? Calling radiation emissions decays, like when they pulse energy, they call it decay. But there's a pulse of energy at the speed of light. If it hits your chromosomes, your DNA, your cells, you're going to whop the shit out of them, mutate them, and turn them into an enemy. Your body has to attack the source. So if you get this anthropogenic man-made radiation, you're on the side of the road, you're picking some crops, and it's got radiation on it because of the trucks driving past all the time. When you eat that stuff sequesters in your muscles, your organs, your bones, mutating your stem cells for the children, and your thyroid glands are producing radioactive hormones. How do you think that's going to work out? You're going to have to liquidate your assets to try to give the child some comfort for a dozen years until their health completely deteriorates. But when you're picking the food off the side of the road because you lived there all your life, you're breathing the air, you're drinking that water, it's in your body. Your body attacks the source for the rest of your life with white blood cells. For every white blood cell, which is what it's doing, you're displacing a red blood cell that carries oxygen nutrition. So that's a recipe for, oh crap. It's in your bones, so you got to mutate the stem cells for the rest of your life, and your thyroid gland is producing radioactive hormones. It doesn't just need to be iodines. Any gammas, cesium for instance, will aggregate in your thyroid. And so what you're seeing is your immune system is completely compromised forever. Your body's under siege. You have very little oxygen. You have no energy, lethargic all the time. And you don't know what's wrong with you. Your doctor can't figure out what's wrong with you. And then you get the diagnosis that you got blood cancer because you're producing more white blood cells than red blood cells as a response to having radiation in your body. Radiation's in your body. It pulses energy every second. They call it a decay, but it's not a decay. It's a pulse of energy almost at the speed of light. It might do it for 1 million years. How can you call that a decay? It does it every second. So it wrecks your chromosomes, your DNA. Your body got to repair every one of them every second. And you might have thousands and millions of these in your body. Your body has the same response. It's trying to build a tumor around every single one of them. It could take 10 years, 30 years, but eventually it will. If you only got one in your body. But you're not just going to have one in your body, you're going to have many in your body. So you're producing so many white blood cells. Right, you get the diagnosis, you got leukemia, and nothing they can do for you. Here, have some more radiation, that'll fix it. And don't go that route. It doesn't work that way. For every study you can show me of going to the hospital and getting radiation and getting rid of one tumor, I can show you 10,000 studies showing that now you ended up with 6 more tumors over the next couple of months because you radiated everything. If this is indeed what making history looks like, I, for one, have grave concerns for the future generations. Joan Williams, bless your heart. Very well done. Great story. You don't see many stories like that. How many times have we covered a story where the whole story was pretty honest, right? And accurate. That's a rarity. I almost had to pinch myself when I read it originally. Well, I think I did, actually. Camco stands to gain as meta and big tech turns to nuclear power. Pre-Fukushima, you'd be like 8, 9, 10, 12 counts per minute. Now it's 140, 250 counts per minute. And in the wintertime, you expect to get a bit higher counts because the air is colder and it holds more radiation. The atoms, the physical atoms, right? So you're breathing that stuff in. In Japan, in the first year, obesity rates doubled, just shy of doubled, which is a marker for radiation brain damage. And in Canada, it's like 70% now is obese. They don't know what they've done. They were normal all their lives, and after Fukushima, everybody gained massive amount of weight. And Japan had the food was banned by 55 countries for a decade. Like you notice, I said countries, not Canada, but actual countries. Canada removed all the restrictions after 93 days. So here was Japan with the food ban in 14 prefectures, which is half the country. Just Fukushima was making 1 billion, and still is, 1 billion pounds of rice a year. And that's what we're going to poll tonight, asking a real simple question. Should deadly food from Japan's nuclear wasteland be banned worldwide to preserve the future of humans? And that should be, it's vital that we do that. Japan has gone rogue on humanity. And there's a lot of good people here, but we can't, there's nothing we can do about it. Lots of dictatorship countries have good people. There's nothing we can do about it. The right thing to do is ban the food from Japan permanently, at all costs. Bring a magnifying glass, which when you go to the supermarket, check everything suspect to make sure it wasn't produced in Japan or it wasn't shipped and packaged somewhere else, because they're notorious for doing that too. That was one of the most despicable things we know now happened, was they would ship container ship loads of food to other countries and repackage it and say it was from that country. But in the small print, it was produced in Japan. It's a good deal, Dan. It's a good deal. $5 cheaper than anywhere else. $5 cheaper than Walmart, Dana. I had to buy it. I couldn't pass up on that. Yeah, it is from Japan, but it'll be okay. Walmart wouldn't poison me. Famous last words. Should deadly food from Japan's nuclear wasteland be banned worldwide to preserve the future of humans? We'll be saying that about Ontario pretty soon. When the world wakes up and realizes what's gone down. Well, you know, to Darlington, to Pickering, to... Like the amount of releases from the Canadian, because they're CANDU reactors, they're tritium breeders for the nuclear weapon industry. The nuclear weapons industry uses tritium and adds it. It's like $30,000 a gram or something, and they add it to the nuclear weapon to double, triple, quadruple its explosive power, just by adding tritium to the nuclear weapon. And tritium you can't contain in it, so they have to replenish it quite often. So that's what the CANDU reactors are actually all about. Power is a byproduct. So Camco is well positioned to benefit from the expected surge in uranium demand as a result of the resurgence of nuclear power sector. There is no resurgence of nuclear power. Right? There simply is no resurgence of nuclear power. Let me show you what I mean by that. It's a pretty neat trick. What you're hearing, there's a nuclear renaissance, and I just don't want you to invest your money because you're going to lose it if you put it in the nuclear industry. Here we go. So this year, 2024, there's going to be around 660 gigawatts of solar powered alone. This is absurd numbers we're talking about. Nuclear total, this is almost double the total capacity of nuclear. Nuclear is around 360 gigawatts worldwide total of the 400 reactors. 412 reactors. But there's 412, Dana? Okay, 412. They're usually like 0.87 or something gigawatts each. Just in solar, we brought online this year almost double the total capacity of nuclear. But the big one we're missing is geothermal, right? So let's go back. Let's go back to the Camco Corporation. Camco, now what they're talking about, you know, how these big metas, and which is Facebook and Amazon and Google, are all saying they're going to buy small modular reactors. Well, they don't exist. They're so far from production that it works this way. So they got 80 different designs worldwide going on for the small modular reactors. After 80 years, we still don't have a small modular reactor. What does that tell us? You got 80 new companies, new ones. And some of them are on stock market. They don't even have an application into the regulatory agency, which means they're 25, 30, 40 years away from fruition, which means you're never going to make a nickel on your investment. You're just going to lose it. And so every 2 to 3 weeks, you'll see these types of headlines where they're using this small modular reactor narrative as if it exists or something, right? You got to build one on one of the national laboratory sites. It's 10 years down the road. Then you got to run it hard for a decade, get the kinks out of it, make sure it's not going to blow up on you. Then you got to re-engineer everything, all the flaws you found into it. Then you got to send the application back into the regulatory agency, redesign everything, You got to try that out, and then maybe then you can start the production of it. 30 years down the road, 40 years down the road, if you hit all the right sweet spots on the way. It's not going to happen. The industry doesn't work that way. And small modular reactors are going to build in Canada are 24 stories. The boiling water reactor 300, the General Electric's design, is 24-story building. You're not going to put that on a lorry or transport truck and ship it somewhere. It does. You're talking about a 24-story building. Have you ever seen a 24-story building? It's like, oh shit, that boy is big, right? You're not putting that on the back of trucks and shipping it anywhere. And so Microsoft and Alpha, which is Google, might talk about nuclear and small modular reactor, might say that they signed a memorandum of understanding, but none of the people that are alive doing that will be alive if it ever comes to fruition. It's that far down the road. PNF fines nuclear power companies $5 million over foreign bribery. This is a French company. This is Riva and Arverne, which are the actual government. They gave themselves a $5 million fine because they were foreign bribery. So in order to beat out a competitor in a foreign country to build their reactors, France is already, the government just dissolved for the third time 2024. And their current budget is dependent upon them getting back up and running with a whole new government. That's not going to come to fruition. They're not going to be building 8 reactors. And so the stock market, though, seized upon those and the Microsoft and Amazon and Meta memorandums of understanding that are not going to ever come to fruition. As a reason, your loved ones who worked all their lives should invest their life savings into uranium stocks, and they're going to lose it. In 3 weeks' time, it's going to lose 40-50% of its value. Your loved ones will panic and sell it for the loss. And so they just lost the majority of their life savings because time taxes get at them. And then the nuclear industry cashed in and took your money. And then when you sold it, they came back in and they bought it and they had a 30-40% profit. And they do that every 2 or 3 weeks to the investors, particularly here in Canada. It's brutal. Nuclear power costs twice as much as renewables in Australia. Australia got a big push right now, a huge public relation campaign going because the elections are coming up and they want nuclear. And Australia has never built nuclear. So it'll be decades down the road, and it'll always come in twice, 3 times past budget and time. Concern over the world's largest nuclear power plant shows strange behavior. I actually didn't figure out what that story was all about. You know me, that's pretty rare. I'm not sure. Well, the Ishikawa prefecture, the Niigata, right alongside the Ishikawa, which was the Noto Peninsula, right on January the 1st of this year, 2024, had a massive earthquake right there. And Niigata, right alongside of the Kashiwazaki nuclear power plant, which has been offline for 13 years. They're going to reopen it. Or they just... What does that story say? Well, they had 6,500 homes, because we covered that, right, in January. There's 6,500 homes here, right alongside this nuclear power plant, that were destroyed through liquefaction because a fault line that runs right alongside of Ishikawa, between Ishikawa and Niigata prefectures, which is not very far. It was a 4,000-year-old fault line. Now, it erupted on January the 1st. And it was unbelievable damage for there's 6,500 homes way over here that were destroyed through liquefaction. And up at the Noto Peninsula on top of Ishikawa finger you see up there, that's where there was 1,500 landslides. It was a 150-mile rip through that prefecture, that part of the prefecture, where the earth is just cracked wide open. They didn't go send in rescuers. The Shik nuclear power plant, that coastline for 75 miles rose up 13 feet. Japan's the very last place on the planet. I mean, Fukushima speaks volumes. They built it where they have a 3,000-year legacy of tsunamis that are over 300 feet high, and they're 60 miles away from the tectonic plates. 1,000 earthquakes a year, for sure. But they're 60 miles away from the tectonic plate, and tectonic plate is where the continental shelves go unk and displaces for hundreds of miles huge volumes of water. And that's what causes these tsunamis. And they built these things right on the coastline, waiting for a tsunami to show up, and put all their inventories at the top of the buildings, and so by proxy then lost all of that. And so I'm very confused about why they would open the Nagata nuclear power plants, because they're right alongside of that same fault line, 3,500-year fault line, 3,500-year-old fault line that finally snapped after 3,500 years. It's very concerning to done that. Military exemptions to Hawaii nuclear free law repealed. So so Hawaii, the military in Hawaii is no longer to have nuclear in Hawaii. This is a great story. That's a wonderful story. Bill 206, Draft 2, repealed the military's exemptions from Hawaii's country's nuclear-free law. So Hawaii now is officially a nuclear-free country, except for Fukushima. Devastated their entire ecosystem. But because they're out in the middle of the ocean, it's not like they got all these mountains, along their coastlines for thousands and thousands. Like the North America coastline, a lot of the radiation lands on the mountains and washes back down to the coastlines, right? So Hawaii got high mountains for sure, but they don't have that volume because they have such a big volume of water going by every day. It mitigates it a little bit, not all the way, of course. Bill 206, Draft 2, repealed the military exemption. And the entire Chapter 14, Article 8 of the Hawaii County Code. Pretty impressive. That's such a great story. We don't get a lot of great stories anymore, do we? How anger at the rollout of the renewables is being hijacked by a new pro-nuclear network. How anger at the rollout of renewables. Bear with me 1 second. I just want to make a point. A point is a point, right? Don't forget to click around a little tiny bit. Click some bells and all that stuff, or not. So this is an atom in your body. It's pulsing energy every second. It results in this explosion every second. That kills all the chromosomes and DNA all over your body. Body tries to repair every bit of that every second, and attacks the source to come up with a solution. And so Einstein said that if he had understood the true nature of radioactive fallout, he never would have shared this information. Because the radioactive fallout is your problem, right? And don't forget to give us a couple old gigadays. So some people protest, and we love those people. And there's a lot of demons out there that you got to be worried about. And what we do is we run an educational program to get people so that they can extrapolate on their own with the documentation. So when they're fed a bunch of bullshit, they can read right between the lines accurately and have the appropriate response. There is nobody like Spider-Man was created by the nuclear. It wasn't created by the nuclear industry, but it was co-opted by the nuclear industry, the same as the Hulk. It was co-opted to make your children incapable of comprehending it, right? And right now, there's so many superheroes, like you can't count them. And so the average child doesn't see their parents or their grandparents or their aunts or uncles or important people in their life as the heroes that they should see them. And he diluted the word hero with the GoPro hero and and Guitar Hero. So many ways, right? Like we used to get rid of our problems. Remember those good old days? We got rid of our problems. Anybody remember those days? A long time ago. Then it was never a problem, right? And now you got people like Homer Simpson brainwashing people, making it incapable and dangerous because they don't understand. They got to avoid a lot of things, right? And so people don't see Japan as something to avoid. The food, it's so far away. Yeah, but the plume covers the whole planet right away. How angered at the rollout, this is Australia, of renewables being hijacked by new pro-nuclear network, brand new for Australia. And it used to be Michael Schellenberg was one of the major players who would come into a country and would rally the local industry, fund them to get them active and promote nuclear, right? Rod Adams is a prime example of those types of people, by the way. An alliance of political groups is harnessing real fears about the locals. And so the pro-nuclears out there saying windmills are going to kill all the whales. But the windmills don't make the whales emaciated. The whales are dying from emaciation because the food chain is broken. And we're seeing, just the numbers we're seeing are unprecedented. 10,000 plus, 10,350 whales of gray whales alone, just gray whales. The majority of them, we cover it for years and years and years. The majority of them in just a 6-year period we're talking about, which is an unusual mortality event, recognized as of the gray whales, but the majority of them were emaciated. So for them to be emaciated, they had to travel 10,000 miles and lose 12 inches of blubber down to 1 or 2 inches, right? And then they show up emaciated eels. You see their spine sticking out, and they'll have the peanut-shaped heads. They'll say they got hit by a boat or this and that and everything else. The total number, by the way, of boat interactions since the 70s was only 1,200 pre-Fukushima. So why is there a surge of thousands and thousands and thousands? Well, it's not. The disinformation campaign is very, very prolific. And so they're up in Australia saying the wind farms are going to kill all the whales. That's what's killing all the whales. We're putting that connotation in the community. The average person in the community has no concept of our narrative you just heard. And we know it's true because we've been doing this for a very long time. I've been doing it for 23 years. And, we've done 6 years of research expeditions from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska. Each year, 4 to 5 months, and went back for 4 to 5. We went back for 5 more years. So we've done research expeditions from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska for 4 to 5 months a year, doing species counts. There's 27,000 islands along that route too, right? And I hit this from every direction you can conceive. You'll be quite surprised at how diligent I am. I just go out and meander for months and months. That's the typical weather. For months and months. Usually 4 to 5 months a year through all these islands. Yeah, because you say a bunch of islands. Look at all the shelter I got, but look how rough it is. And when you're out there for months and months and months, and the species, this is what it should look like. Right? It should be amazing. And instead, this is what I found to the right. And so when you see the before and after pictures, we went back for 5 more years to see if the species to your left recovered. And the species to your left didn't recover. And now we had the documentation that this had happened. We knew the buildings were destroyed. We knew how the follow went. We had the actual studies, too, on top of this. We knew the food was banned in half the country, by 55 countries for over a decade. And we launched emergency research expeditions 4 to 5 months a year, typically. And it might look cool, looks like a lot of fun, but it's a nightmare. On a good day, it's still a nightmare because when you're out there for 4 to 5 months a year, things go wrong, even on good days. And when there's a bad day, that's when it all shows up to one time, right? So the species to your left are now extinct because of Fukushima, because of radioactive fallout 5,500 miles away. That's a typical day, right? I used to pick 20,000 of the red purple sea urchins a day. It's typically 5,000 pounds or 3-inch only. There's many different sizes, so you're only picking a 3-inch. It's 6 hours a day or something, right? So those species are exterminated. You'll never take those pictures to your left again. The sun will never rise. And I know because I went there year after year and the species didn't come back. And so if you plowed in a healthy beach, the species from deeper both sides will fill up the gap. The ocean itself would have 1 billion creatures per glass of water. The very soup of life, right? And 75 to 100 million of them would have been the phytoplankton, the basis of the food chain, the oxygen chain, the carbon sequestering chain. So that was wiped out right away. So what happens when you got a lot less oxygen in the environment? People start doing stupid stuff, right? You add alcohol and cigarettes to it, which also displaces oxygen. And you open the can of, oh, goodness gracious, we're in trouble. All right, back on track here. The coast belongs to everyone, and they should have the opportunity to understand what's going on. This time in Australia. So the nuclear industry, I'm just trying to get to that part. I mean, look at the counts on my Geiger counter tonight. Jesus. And cold weather, and it's cold night, cold down here tonight. We're going to warm up tomorrow though, for a change, for a day. I got a bunch of stuff I got to get done. I got a bunch of welding to do tomorrow too. I'm too old to do this stuff anymore, by the way. I'm tired of that stuff. I like working at this stuff because it's always warm and dry. See. The nuclear energy wedge. In June, the coalition of Australia announced it would lift the bans on nuclear energy if it won next year's election and build 9 publicly owned reactors, which is the worst statement imaginable, at sites around the country. Because they had just lost the previous elections, right? And conservative think tanks that have long opposed the shift to renewables. Well, there's a very strong, like the British, there's a very strong pro-nuclear community in Australia. They'll cut everybody's throat to get nuclear. They don't care if it ever comes to fruition as long as they go out there and just plug away at it. That's all they're interested in. Because 660 gigawatts of renewables came online this year, just solar power worldwide. The total capacity of gas, oil, and coal worldwide is 4,800 gigawatts. So having 660 gigawatts in a single year of just solar, not counting other renewable sources, the nuclear industry can smell defeat, right? And there was no new nuclear added to the grid. So there was 365 gigawatts last year. This year, there's probably, even though 4 reactors came online, say, it's still only going to be 363 because they only got a couple come online. So they're still going backwards. And reactors are closing down. They're extending the lives on some of them, but that's not going to save the industry. Right? There's an illusion to keep the stock market alive for a little bit longer. So there's a big amount of pro-nuclear showed up in Australia. And they're out there with all the dirty tricks. And they got lots of money for advertisement and public demonstrations. And they get all their pictures in the media and their narratives. There's a lot of pro-nuclear all of a sudden. And everybody's starting to notice mums for nuclear. No mom in her right mind. Like there's 6 times more breast cancer within 15 miles of a nuclear power plant. What we're talking about South Bruce is going to be infinitely worse, the emissions every day, than a nuclear power plant. Nuclear power plants are brutal because of the fuel pools. The first time you take fuel out of the reactor and you put it in the fuel pool, you're living in a nightmare within 100 miles. There's no way you don't eventually have an autoimmune illness or catastrophic for your children that are born, for instance. And this is where they want to put all the reactors. You got no prices. And it just divides everybody, right? Instead of coming up with like geothermal, which actually exists, and you can have, any community can build it. You don't need scientists from Harvard or Yale or Stanford or Oxford. You can just have any local engineer company build it. So any community that said, hey, we're going to build our own energy supply and then switch off the grid and just use our own. And they'll have enough to feed back into it. If they went geothermal, like English could, or any community, like the native communities in particular, don't realize how cheap it is in comparison of the electricity bill each year for the community. It wouldn't take long to pay off a big geothermal plant, and then people wouldn't have to pay, you would still rake in money for maintenance, but it's not huge maintenance on a geothermal plant. And because the price of, and if you spread your wind towers, instead of putting all your wind in one place, because when the wind don't blow in that little section, then the windmills are not working, right? But if you spread your windmills out over 100 miles, you always got wind blowing. So when they say, well, the wind's not always blowing, well, it actually is, but not in the same spot. If you spread it out over a few hundred miles, you'll always have power from wind. But why would you when you can do geothermal? You know how easy it is to drill a mine shaft? It's really easy. Any community can do it. And then you have a windmill that only compresses air, and that goes down into the mine shaft. And then when the sun is not shining for your solar power, you unpack that compressed air. You can store that in sand. Sand will heat up to 700 degrees, hold temperature. All these techniques are well done. Any big company could go ahead and jimmy it together and have a working demonstration in any community. Have it up and running on just renewables. But then the gig's up, right, for gas, oil, and coal and nuclear. And small modular nuclear reactors are the biggest scam conceivable. It's a 100% money grab, and you really should question whether this is a Ponzi scheme, because that's what it is, and why they're not being held to account for doing what they're doing. Nuclear 2024 conference, Energy Secretary speaks. This is the government of the UK. This is a super important story. This story really tells the story of everybody that's dealing with the pro-nuclear community. That's the thing with these shows, right? You come in for one story, but you got a lot of other stories that all connect. It informs you, educates you, makes you astute, and gives you the ability to extrapolate accurately what the law is, the law they're trying to cover up. That's a very powerful weapon when you're up against this industry. You need that in your arsenal, right? And it only takes a few of these shows, really. If you're thirsty and you're looking for the information, you're going to find it. Secretary of State for the Energy Security, and this is an important story because Nuclear 2024 Conference, Energy Secretary, they're talking about nuclear power plants, right? They're talking about energy. Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero, which is a paper written by Miles Allen, who got a cushy associate professor job at Cambridge in the UK. And UN, which is 195 militaries, took that paper and then weaponized it against humanity, along with a few other tricks. Spoke at the Nuclear Industries Association Nuclear 2024 Conference. Man, this telling lies. If that was an Olympic sport, there'd be nobody on the planet can beat these people. Hang on, I gotta set myself up here. We're almost there. And 80 years of radioactive emissions into the environment, because all the emissions for 80 years have never gone away. It's 80 years straight of emissions, and so it bioaccumulates in everything. It's everywhere. And what that means is every one of them is pulsing energy almost at the speed of light every second. Okay, Secretary of State Energy, we'll get to it. Tim, you are such a brilliant advocate for clean energy. You hear the word clean and nuclear, even though they got nothing in common. Nuclear is by far, it needs 2 gas, oil, or coal plants to run a nuclear plant. So think of a single reactor. Typical site have 4, 5, or 6, but a single reactor needs 1 million gallons, 4,500 tons every minute. So that's the equal. Think about 4,500 one-ton pickup trucks going past you every minute. So it takes a lot of energy to pull that off, right? Now think about you got 5 or 6 of these things on your site. So you need, say you got 5 rows of traffic, and each row there's 4,500 one-ton pickup trucks will pass you every minute. You see, 18,000 pickup trucks, the coal reactors every minute, 1,440 minutes a day. There's 18,000 pickup trucks, 1-ton pickup trucks. Each truck got 1 ton of water into it, a total of 1 million gallons per reactor per minute. Goes past you. Some serious energy, right? And so they need their own gas, oil, and coal plants. It's very dirty. And then the emissions, once you take the fuel out and put it in a fuel pool, it will poison everything for 1 million years. There's nothing on the planet that is not an immune trigger to defend against anthropogenic man-made radioactive fallout. We all attack it and treat it as a foreign entity because it's not recognized as, but from the solar system is what we call it. That's why we call it anthropogenic man-made radiation. My starting point is that you got to have a crucial role to play in powering Britain's, the word clean energy. Yeah. Yeah, we're literally, you got to have a crucial role to play in powering Britain's clean energy future. Well, I mean, he picked up 30 million one-ton bags at Fukushima and 3% of the land. 14% of the prefectures, or 14 prefectures, not just Fukushima, were banned by 55 countries for a decade. So nuclear is not, like, there's only 365 gigawatts worldwide. So how can it be a crucial role in powering anything? How can it make a difference at that small number? When solar this year alone was 660 gigawatts, almost twice the total capacity of nuclear, came online in just solar in 1 year. And expect 40% or better growth each year in just solar. In fact, between 2020 and 2026, the International Energy Agency, not the nuclear industry, but the International Energy Agency estimated there'd be 4,800 gigawatts would come online between 2020 and 2026 in renewables, which is the animosity equivalent of the entire capacity of gas, oil, and coal worldwide. So when you add in another 365 gigawatts, which is nuclear, nuclear is just curb stomping, or renewables are curb stomping nuclear right now, just every way you look at it. Industry offers huge opportunities, but it doesn't. They don't have, the only way you can get an opportunity is if you had the small modular reactors, but economics of scale is the reason you have the large reactors. Because it's not economic to build the small ones. And not only that, the small ones, the studies done on the small ones, was they were going to cost probably $12, $14 billion more to get the same energy as you would from a large reactor. And that the waste produced by the fabled, and I shouldn't use the word fabled, but the non-existent, they don't even have a license into the regulatory agency, which takes, they got to hire hundreds of people to go through the application, like 1 million pieces of paper. And so they're going to produce 5 times more fuel rods than a conventional size reactor when you scale it up by using small modular reactor. And you're going to produce mixed oxide waste, because if they're going to run on, that's the only trick they can do to try to bump the extra energy out of a small unit, see? And which is illegal in Canada and the United States. And it's important that it's illegal because the plutonium mixed oxide fuel is reclaimed uranium plutonium from used fuel, which is only 3% used, but it's so volatile and it's so fragile they can't keep it in the reactor, and it's so volatile they can't store it. So they let it split atoms into the environment, and the tall, skinny stacks at the nuclear power plant are hemorrhaging from the fuel pools. The industry offers huge opportunities to deliver climate security. And so this is a complete misdirection to suggest that nuclear, the most resource-intensive, most polluting industry, is somehow going to be friendly to the climate. And nuclear is the problem with the climate because the atoms are released all day long, and they're pulsing energy almost at the speed of light every second. This has been going on for 80 years. And most likely, and the climate change, like the supercell storms we're seeing, the cyclones, the supercell cyclones, the supercell typhoons, the super hurricanes, cell hurricanes, we're talking about wind speeds of 200 miles per hour plus, gusting higher than that, and 300 miles per hour. But we don't have infrastructure, building codes, right, for 200 mile per hour buildings that can sustain 200 mile per hour winds, because that's not in our lexicon, our vocabulary pre-Fukushima. Neither is the 10,350 dead emaciated gray whales or the 7,000. They already had a mortality event for humpback whales. Then they discovered there was another 7,000 humpback whales that had died they didn't find last year, right? So you're talking about similar numbers, 10,000 or more, in an unusual mortality event for gray whales, and same thing. Now, they only find one in every 10, allegedly. They will spot the carcass, they say. And that's the consensus. But we're seeing the same mass mortality events, not just for gray whales, not just for humpback whales, but for beak whales. There was over 1,000 showed up in different stages of decomposition in Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom, 2017, which the estimated was at least 10,000 had died. And the estimated was around 50,000 dead animals. Now, seeing the culvert beak whale is extraordinary. And they had over 1,000 that they found. And which meant the food chain is broken. We're talking food chain broken, right? And then you've seen on the West Coast, 2015-16, I was up doing research expeditions, but there was 1 million common murres. Common murres, they dive 600 feet all day long. They feed on anchovies and sardines and krill and shrimp and small 4, 5, 6, 7-inch species all day long. And they showed up symmetrically up all the way into Alaska and interior in freshwater lakes, never seen or heard tell of before, by the thousands. And they all had one thing in common: they were emaciated. And we're seeing the same thing with the insect eating. There was 190 species of insect-eating birds showed up in central North America, and they were all emaciated. But on the West Coast, you had over 1 million common murres showed up emaciated. But at the same time, you had 1.4 million Cassini auklets showed up on the migratory route to Australia, and they were microscopic eaters. So they ate. You had two different spectrums of the food chain showing up in millions of birds, and they were all emaciated. No body fat, no muscle mass, and died of starvation. And the coastlines was normally where they would supplement their migratory diets, right? And at the top of that when we were doing that, those research expeditions for 6 years, another thing we noticed was in the tidal zones all the way to Alaska, that 30,000 insects were missing. And of course, the spiders were missing in the forest, because I would check the spider webs for see what species were in that ecosystem. That's tiny microsystem, right? Micro ecosystem, and you're talking about 27,000 islands naked. And so on the East Coast, down here researching, what we discover is that a couple of years ago, when we done the same thing, it was over 1 million, we estimate, common murres showed up emaciated. But at the same time, there was just as many dovekites showing up. And so the common MERS, the thick-billed MERS, that were showing up emaciated in the communities. The government's fisheries and forestries were coming in with their pickup trucks every day, picking up anything in the community itself. And I hit all the gas stations, the post office, the little shops in these little tiny communities, because that's where all the gossip was to, and asked them. And so I was able to isolate where it started, and I never made it to where it ended, because it was 600 miles of coastline with that particular attribute. And so the common MERS are no different here than they were on the West Coast, where they feed on anchovies and sardines and krill and shrimp. And krill are like, big shrimp, right? And they feed on small species, like about this long. And they dive 600 feet all day doing it, right? So at the same time, there was the dove kites, and they are microscopic feeders. They skim the surface of the water, eating the zooplankton, the phytoplankton, and everything else. So on both the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean, we've seen mass die-off of species that are dependent on two different spectrums of the food chain, showing up in unprecedented numbers, never ever before seen. And they were trying to blame it on the bird flu, and there's all kinds. But we defeated that with the facts, right? In the middle of the area where all the birds were being tested for bird flu in the United States during that period, we're all going to the same laboratory. And so there's one city, and I can bring it up and show it to you, but I'm not going to right now, done their own testing, because they're a big city. And there was no bird flu. The birds all died. And there was many different species. It wasn't just the common MERS, for instance. Shearwaters and kittiwakes. They were emaciated. They died of starvation. That was the official cause of death. Right in the middle, where all the other communities were reporting, cities were reporting they were dying of bird flu, simply wasn't true. It was the same thing for the 3,500 sea lions earlier this year in Chile. The pictures they show you are emaciated, unbelievably emaciated golden California sea lions, which takes quite a long time for them to get that emaciated. So the food chain is broken. And all of these stuff are post-Fukushima, not pre-Fukushima. And we have gone to war for all these years, and we're still going strong. I don't know how. I really don't. Just pure will at this stage, right? Because the world deserves somebody out there that's honest, right? At all costs. Phil Hunt, our nuclear minister. Now, currently, I'm doing something stupid. I'm saving up to try to get a cheap Skidoo for a couple $1,000. That's the plan. By after Christmas, hopefully, I'll be in that neighborhood. If everything works out right. And I can go out and buy a Skidoo and stick it on a trailer and go looking for tracks this winter in my spare time, just to get me active, get my bones moving again. Nothing stupid, right? Not going out breaking trails or anything like that. Just staying on well-known trails. We are entering an age of clean electricity. That's the dream, anyway, for this winter, is to get out, start. Because in the wintertime, you got a good chance of seeing any kind of tracks. That's important to the bigger picture. The spiders are missing down here, too, right? Should be 500,000 per acre. They're missing. Our goal of clean power by 2030, nuclear, clean electricity. You see those connotations over and over and over. This is United Kingdom nuclear energy hoo-ha. Despite this being a time of immense challenges for the public finances, we are determined to drive forward nuclear through both public and private investments. Forward, we should be enthusiastic about nuclear. The government, clean energy. They use the word clean energy so much. 38 times or something in this speech. A group of climate, decarbonization. So all the key words, the backbone of decarbonization. How can something that don't even supply a tenth of the electricity worldwide have those particular connotations? How does that actually work? In 2009, I identified the 8 sites for new nuclear. Climate threat we face is because of the radioactive failure for 80 years. It's still out there, pulsing energy almost at the speed of light every second, breaking down the bases of the food chain, the oxygen chain, the carbon sequestration chain. That's what all nuclear is good for. We need nuclear and batteries. So whenever you see anybody saying we need nuclear and batteries, they're the the devil in disguise in many ways, right? Because you would use lava rocks to store energy. It's way more efficient than batteries. Batteries are garbage, and the amount of pollution caused to produce the batteries is unbelievable, and it's always coming from a third world country with a lot of slave labor. And they would never work in that labor if they weren't being exploited. Carbon capture. Without carbon, you can't have trees or plants or humans or insects or birds or puppies. Nuclear has a particular role in providing clean. So during the whole speech, you've seen those connotations over and over and over and over. He said, I had the privilege of going to the Hinkley site. Why is that a privilege? What do you mean a privilege? He's truly overwhelmed. It's the biggest construction site on the entire planet. It's the most resource-intensive site we've ever seen. Enough cement to build a sidewalk all the way to Rome from UK. Just in cement. It's so stupid, and it's surrounded by farms as far as you can see, and it's right on the coast. It's not the largest construction site in Europe. It's the world's largest construction site. Hinkley Point. See if I can bring up some pictures for you. So that's the plan, is to get a cheapo Skidoo, because it's just going to be going down a safe road and back again. Don't need nothing fancy. And start doing some research once the snow starts flying. There we go. This is Hinkley Point. It's hard to appreciate what a nightmare this site actually is. They got some of the biggest cranes, or the biggest cranes on the entire planet working there. Imagine how much electricity it takes to run all this each day. So every plant needs 2 gas, oil, and coal plants to build it. That's 15, 20 years. To run it for its lifespan, and then for 60 years to decommission it. And also they can get their hands on weapons grade uranium and plutonium and deuterium. Hinkley Point is so far behind schedule and so far away. It's going to be something like $36 billion at the current estimate for a nuclear site. $36 billion. By the time it gets there, it's going to be another 5, 6, 7, 8 billion. It's absurd how much money they wasted. And the same amount of money they could have 3 times geothermal, and it would have already been finished. So, and they know that. They're aware that the technology has changed big time now for drilling, see? Great British Nuclear started contract negotiations with 4 companies shortlisted in small modular reactor competitions. Like the Great British Nuclear, they come up with a new Great British Nuclear company every year. Advanced modular reactors don't exist. So their whole future is predicated upon something that doesn't exist and is highly unlikely. And together, I think we can do great things for our country and our world. I mean, it was embarrassing. When I read the story, I was like, well, who the hell besides Rod Adams can write a speech like that? There's probably nobody out there any better at writing lies than Rod Adams, is it? From Atomic Insight. The perpetual degenerate Rod Adams. He's a venture capitalist now, where he's doling out money to startups. After all these years of being a scumbag, he finally found a niche where he can just loot the system. Congratulations, Rod. Your parents must be so proud. His daughter moved away from as far as she can get. I wonder why. Here's our poll. Should deadly food from Japan's nuclear wasteland be banned worldwide to preserve the future of humans? Oh, yeah. You better believe it. We covered that extensively earlier. And that's it for Dana. That's all I got. That's everything. Hi, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well tonight. Yeah, it looks great, eh? So, this is Tuesday night. So tomorrow night, I got most of the show ready to go for tomorrow night already. Sucker for punishment. But I'm probably going to have to eventually sell a few things in order to get my hands on a Skidoo. And just for the last couple of months, because we had a Skidoo a few years ago, and I wasn't very healthy then. I'm doing much better now. So think about a media that pretends is on a building that don't exist, and then you can appreciate why we're in so much danger. I'm going to play Meltdown Queen. This is a James Lucid song. And let's have a look at James on the big screen here. Oh, shit. Hang on here. Oh, James is almost past me. What have I got? I get 5 subscribers a month, maybe. James gets 15 or 20 a day now. I got 163, 1.63 thousand. My other side, I had 24,800 subscribers for 5 years. Never gained one, never lost one. God bless YouTube. And we're going to play, that's a really good song, that one, Nuclear Industry PR Crisis. We played not last night, but the night before. Oh Santa Susanna. And some of the headlines, are the name of his songs are just awesome, man. So Meltdown Queen, that's the one we're going to play tonight. That got a bit of traction. And just the closing song for tonight. It's a great song, isn't it? I mean, spectacular job. You got so many different genres. See everybody on the next show. And the next one is the next one, and the next one. And the Geiger counter lasted all night. That's pretty darn good, you ask me. Have a great night. We'll see everybody on the next show. Take care, folks.
Looks untouchable, yeah, she's unstoppable. Tick, tick, tick. Hearts on split, split, split. Watch her move, boy. She's your meltdown hit. She walks in like a savior draped in radioactive silk. Promises the future, but her balance starts to tilt. Her heels strike the ground, they call it innovation, but every move she makes is pure detonation. Tick, tick, watch her light the fuse. Her lips are like ignition, sparks in every word she speaks. She dances through collapse while her empire springs a leak. She's got blueprints in her pocket, cores hidden in her clutch, and every man who follows her forgets she burns too much. Snap, snap, she's the queen of chaos. Tick, 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 watch her take control. She's a meltdown queen with a heart so cold. Snap, 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 you're under her spell. She's the meltdown queen and she does it so well. Break it down. She keeps a coded suitcase, her secrets stitched in seams. Her nails are brushed with graphite, her plans are laced with schemes. They call her the solution. her trap. Oh, she's flawless, she's insane. Your dream girl, your nightmare, your chain reaction flame. She's untouchable, unshakable, impossible to tame. But when she melts down, boy, you'll forget her name. Tick, tick, she's the game you'll lose. Tick, 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 she's a chain reaction. Every step she takes leads destruction. Snap, 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 her game is supreme. Meltdown queen, she's the star of your dream. You don't even know. Charm's a perfect weapon, her brilliance blinding clear. Her plans are sealed in circuits and she smiles to engineer. Every corporation crowns her of the prize, while the ocean full and cities vaporize. Tick, tick, she's the queen of disguise. Tick, 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 she's untouchable, unstoppable. She'll steal your soul, leave you unlovable. Snap, 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 what's left to say? Meltdown queen.